Hi, welcome to the next lecture in this Introduction to Philosophy course. This one's entitled The Textbook Definition. Um, One of the things that students often ask is the meaning of philosophy, and after having students give me their own take on what it means, then we usually run through the basic sort of traditional ideas that people have about the nature of philosophy and why the word means what it does. So in this lecture, we're just going to be looking at some of the terminology that's important to the discipline and hopefully understanding why it is. As I mentioned before, philosophy is odd in a number of respects, but especially in that it asks what it itself is as a discipline. In answer to the question, what is philosophy, we usually turn to the etymology of the word, which comes from the Greek philosophia, which is represented by the old Greek phi symbol. And it's basically built up of philos or philia, meaning love of or appreciation for. And of course there are lots of words in English, that contain either philos or philia, or in many cases in English phile. So if someone is a bibliophile or whatnot, they have a love or appreciation for whatever that's attached to. And sophos or sophia, meaning wisdom. So we'll encounter several cases where sophos is used. If you have friends who go by the name of Sophia or Sophie, then of course that's just the literal meaning of their name. Also, a lot of times we'll hear the word philosophy used in ways that aren't entirely easy to reconcile. If someone says our philosophy at Bank of America is to take all of your money and keep it for ourselves, they're using it in the way I have written here as lowercase p. In other words, it's a particular philosophy, a general view of things, or the beliefs held by a particular person or group. One's philosophy is something like one's take on things, one's overall view, etc. As opposed to the uppercase P in philosophy, which designates the discipline that weighs the merits of various beliefs. So as we'll see throughout this semester, a number of people might have a number of different philosophies, and the discipline of philosophy, at least in part, is meant to take a look at the various belief systems, weigh their merits and demerits, and see if maybe there's a way of adjudicating between them to figure out if one is preferable to another, and if so, why. Or in some cases, some might actually claim that one of the belief systems is true, and of course we'll get to figure out what that means according to a number of various philosophies. So we'll begin, as textbooks very often do, with some of the terminology that you're going to encounter over the course of the semester. And the reason that we're starting with the ones that we are is because we're going to hear them come up in a variety of contexts and see people use them in ways that are similar and different. And since some of the terminology is not as common in everyday conversation as it is among philosophers, getting acquainted with some of these terms early on is a good idea. So the first of them that we're going to look at is metaphysics. And in many books, metaphysics is described as the theory of reality. But since we're going to look at a number of metaphysical theories, I'm simply changing the name slightly to, or the description slightly, to the study of reality. And then I have, that is, of what there really is, because reality itself is kind of a word that's hard to figure out. We get a vague concept when someone uses the word reality, but when people in daily use say the word really as an adverb, it's much easier for us to get a clear sense of what we mean. So when someone studies metaphysics, they're trying to study what there really is, or how things really are, independently of what any particular person or group may contend. So we'll see lots of people in our study who will contend that this particular way of getting at things will lead to an understanding of reality, or claim that this is what reality is. So metaphysics is an attempt to get beyond anyone's particular take on things and try to see how they are, in an expression philosophers use, to get at how they are in themselves. The next one is less common. Metaphysics you'll hear from time to time, but the next one, epistemology, which is in textbooks often described as the theory of knowledge, I've again changed to the study of knowledge, because we'll also encounter a number of epistemological theories. Etymologically, episteme from the Greek means knowledge, basically, and the logy ending, which we'll see in a later lecture, basically here means study of, and does so in just about all English usage. So epistemology is the study of knowledge, but especially the study of how we know. If someone says, this is how things really are, usually the first thing we want to know is, how do you know that, or how did you find that out? So it's how to tell between what someone believes is the case and what actually is the case. In other words, between genuine knowledge and what will later be called mere or only belief. In the field of epistemology, we'll run into what's usually referred to as a reality appearance distinction. We want to know not so much how things appear to us, but how they really are, and that's the traditional quest. And so sometimes we're adjudicating not just between appearance and reality, but between various forms of appearances. One person contends this, another contends that, and how is one to tell? What's involved in knowing, or especially what's involved in knowing that you or someone is right? On a related term is the word skepticism, which we'll see a couple of times in our semester. That basically just means doubt about anyone's ability to have certain knowledge. In general parlance, if someone says, I'm skeptical about something, they usually mean that they doubt that particular subject, whatever you're talking about. So if you think, I think my particular sports team is going to go all the way this year, and someone says, well, I don't know, I'm skeptical, they mean about the particular claim that you've made, that team may not be as able as you'd like to think they are. In philosophy, skepticism means it's the contention that no one will ever be in a position, or may never be in a position, to know how things really are. So when people study epistemology, if their goal is knowledge of how the world really is, skepticism is always close by, basically making the contention that that may never be possible. The next term, ethics, is of course much more common. Sometimes it's referred to in the discipline of philosophy as moral philosophy, and it's basically the study of what makes particular acts right or wrong. And even though it's not said, we normally mean what makes particular human acts right or wrong. With respect to other species, when an animal does something, even something we don't like, we don't normally call its behavior immoral. It refers only to people, at least traditionally. And so what the discipline of ethics is concerned to figure out is how to tell what someone ought or ought not do, and why a particular form of behavior is considered good or bad, or of course some people might even use the word evil. Is it simply a matter of someone not liking what that person does, or is there something inherent in the nature of certain acts that make them good or bad? And of course related to that is, what are then the best and worst things for people to do? If I want to figure out how I should live, and we'll see this especially with Socrates, knowing which acts are best for a person to do, for whatever reason they happen to be good for us, those apparently are the things that I should strive to do. And if there are things that are inherently bad for me to do, those are the things that I should avoid if I want to live a good life. But related to that is also, what type of things should I do in life? the much more modern term existentialism refers to the idea that there are choices I could make at any given time about what sort of things I ought to aspire to, what kinds of achievements I would like, and then of course the means that will be necessary to attain those ends. But part of the question is, why should I do this rather than that? Why should I take one course of action instead of another? And so this is something that all of us wrestle with, whether we think of it in theoretical terms or not. What should I do with my life? What should I become? Those kinds of things. Each of the last three terms is considered a branch in the discipline of philosophy. This next one, human nature, is not, at least not by this name. In philosophy, this will go by something like the philosophy of mind or philosophy of the self. The attempt here is to figure out what sorts of things are common to people, what give them their specific nature, or the way that they are. When you hear people say it's only human nature to, and then they fill in the blank with whatever they claim it is human nature to do or not to do, they seem to be suggesting that there's something that's understandable about people and their behavior and why, and their motivations, why they do what they do, etc. But most importantly, what we're trying to figure out here is the kind of thing, so to speak, that a person is. So when people use words like mind, self, soul, consciousness, what are they referring to? We'll see some people that want to say that there are in effect otherworldly elements inside bodies, and that's what's meant by when someone uses the word mind or soul. And other people who want to say that it's basically just an effect or function of one's physiology, and a number of variations in between. So the reason that it's listed here at the outset is that once you have an understanding of what someone thinks the human mind or soul or spirit or whatever word you would use consists of, or what it is, so to speak, it becomes a lot easier to figure out what kinds of contentions they'll make when it comes to what a person should or should not do, that is the ethics, what it's possible for a person to know and how they know, that's the epistemology stuff, and what it's possible to know. In other words, when someone's saying, I want to know how the world really is, or someone's saying, I don't think it's possible that anyone ever could know how the world really is, understanding how the mind or soul, or whatever word we might use, works, or what kind of thing it is, will very quickly determine what that person can think with respect to those other questions. So when you're reading a philosophy or studying a particular philosopher, if you can figure out what kind of thing they think we are, you'll have a much easier time of figuring out what their contentions are, or even should be, with respect to those other issues. And one of the more important elements in philosophical conversation is the argument. A lot of times when we hear that people are arguing, we think that they're yelling at each other or fighting or upset in some way. But in philosophy, an argument is simply a claim followed by reasons that are meant to back up that claim, to justify it. Or, if it doesn't occur in that order, where the reasons come first, they're called premises, and they lead or should lead to a conclusion that they're justifying. So an argument is basically a claim of some kind with reasons in support of it, whether the claim comes first or last. Okay? It has to do with what we'll see is the logical relation between the reasons and the claim, or between the premises and the conclusion. For that reason, when the reasons supporting the claim, or when the premises lead to the conclusion, the argument is valid. So a lot of times, and this will become important later, when someone says the word true, they can only be referring to a claim or a conclusion. They could even be referring to one of the premises in the argument, but in other words, they're always referring to a statement of some kind. We'll come back to this. But an argument is never true or false. An argument is only valid or invalid. That is, the reasoning is sound or unsound. And all that means is that the reasons justify or support the claim, or the premises lead to or allow you to infer the conclusion. Okay? And while we use the word argument, as I said, to suggest something violent or confrontational in an emotional sense, not only is it very often not the case in philosophy, it doesn't even have to involve other people. I can run through an argument myself, or you can yourself, without involving anybody else. You can simply think to yourself, do the reasons support the claim that I'm making, or that I've known someone else to make? Or if I use these reasons, which then become premises if I start with them, do they get me to the conclusion? Not, is the conclusion true or false, but do these claims, these statements that are being made, get me to the other one? And just as you can start with the claim and support it with reasons, or start with the reasons and use them as premises to lead to a conclusion, so you can reason from general principles in order to figure out a particular instance or circumstance, or you can reason from particular instances to formulate general principles. That is, you can reason deductively, the way a detective would, let's say, by figuring out what happened in this particular case by referring to the nature of cases of this kind, general principles that you have for figuring out things like this. Or you can reason inductively by looking at particular instances and finding out what it is about them, what are its features that are common to all of those things, and from those particular instances or circumstances, reason out the general principles that underlie them. In other words, the universal characteristics that they seem to suggest. And these two ways of reasoning, deduction and induction, we'll see throughout the course of the semester. And finally, there's the issue of terminology generally. Now having learned what philosophy means, at least the textbook definition of it, and some of the subfields of philosophy that we'll be looking at, we'll need to make sure that we're clear on the terminology that philosophers use, and some of which will be words you and I use all the time, others will be peculiar to that particular way of thinking. So the first point to keep in mind is that if you run across terminology you're unfamiliar with, try to figure out what's meant by it, either in general or by the particular person that we're studying at the time. So be sure to learn the meanings of the philosophical terminology, and you can do that either in context, the way the word's used in the readings. You and I do that all the time. It's basically how we acquired language. The glossary in the back of the book, a dictionary, either the old school book style or online, or by asking if after you've looked at the terminology of these various sorts and you still just don't have a sense of what the person means by the term, or what the term means in general, then by all means ask about it, because some of these terms are quite unusual, as are the ideas that they're meant to convey. And then there are a number of sites online that you might find helpful, and there's no reason that you ever have to stick only with the sites that I or anyone else refers you to. But there are a couple here that you may find helpful because they're very thorough, especially the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy, which is quite extensive, and it's things like Wikipedia, for example, have a reputation for not being accurate. I don't know that I would say that's the case. That may be the case for much of pop culture, but for some of these things that are more esoteric, there's probably not too much in a site like that people have their doubts about. But if you want a source that you can be sure of, things like either the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy or the other one I have here, the Internet Encyclopedia of Philosophy, can both be a lot of help. The main thing, though, is to make sure that you're secure about the terminology precisely because not only are we going to be using a lot of the same terms over the course of the semester, but different people will use the same terms differently. So it's important that we get clear on what the words mean in general, so to speak, so that we can understand the differences between the various thinkers and how they're using those terms.